Welcome to Jews on Film. My name is Harry Adensasser. I have a degree in film studies. I am currently a Jew, and I have never rolled on Shabbos, and I am one of the hosts of this podcast. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Daniel Zano.
Hi, Harry. My name is Daniel Zana. I am a documentary filmmaker, a video editor, and I'm still looking for my Credence tapes. But I'm excited today to talk about The Big Lebowski finally. I know a lot of people have been asking about this movie, and we're excited today to be discussing it with our guest today, who's a writer and editor living in Los Angeles. Her journalism, nonfiction, and poetry have appeared in The Forward, Lilith Magazine, Tablet Magazine, Kveller, My Jewish Learning, E-Jewish Philanthropy, and elsewhere. She's currently the managing editor at the Jewish Review of Books, the script writer at Yiddish Pop, and it is an MFA candidate at Antioch University, LA, for creative nonfiction. Julie Sugar, welcome to Jews on Film.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here to discuss the movie. Like I said, The Big Lebowski, written and directed by Joel and Ethan Coen. Not our first Coen Brothers movie. We previously have done A Serious Man, also another Jewish film. I shouldn't say also. I don't want to tease anyone's ratings or anything like that, but it is kind of an interesting movie. You know, before we kind of dig into it, Julie, I wanted to know, simple question, why'd you pick this film?
I thought of The Big Lebowski. What was interesting was that I told you I wanted to talk about The Big Lebowski, and I hadn't watched it in a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And what had happened since watching it, and I can probably place this. I probably watched it in 2001. Maybe 2002, 2001 or 2002. It was before I graduated from high school, not to age me too much, but there you have it. When I saw it, and that was the last time I saw it until recently, I did not identify as Shomer Shabbos. I didn't really know what Shabbos was. There's a character in The Big Lebowski who identifies as Shomer Shabbos. So I was really curious to revisit it and also talk about religious Jewish characters in films, and I feel like the character of Walter Sobchak is just such a big deal, looms so large. So I'm happy to talk about other things as well, including, of course, the dude, but it was Walter and wanting to revisit a Shomer Shabbos character on film, and in a film that so many of us love so much.
Right.
I had seen this film like a long time ago, and I, of course, knew about the Shomer Shabbos line, and I probably knew that going into it back then, because that, like you said, Daniel, this has been a highly requested movie. It's one of the most iconic, I would say, Jewish lines in any major movie.
Sure.
And but this time when I was watching it, especially because, like you're saying, Julie, that Walter is this, outsized Jewish character, right? He really is, and at least explicit Jewishness. And I think we're going to talk about a lot of the spirituality of this movie and the symbolism. But if you wanted to point to someone who is, so clearly Jewish, it's Walter and all of his lines there. And I'm excited to talk about his character, because obviously he's Jewish, but his representation of a Jewish character is, I couldn't compare it to anything. It's unlike any of, I think, some of the, the tropes, so to speak, that Daniel and I have identified in past episodes about what characterizes a Jewish character. And Walter, he's coming with a lot that I can't place, and I don't want to get too specific yet because we'll get into it, but I didn't always find myself sympathizing with him. Sometimes I was upset with the way he used his religion. Sometimes I was very impressed by how devoted he was to it, but it was really just a complex portrayal that I'm so excited to get into.
Yeah, totally. And I was also and I'm happy to talk, of course, we can zoom out and talk about the whole movie, before we dive into Walter. That character is definitely the reason I wanted to talk about The Big Lebowski. And I think it's just so exciting to see a Jewish character who, on one hand, feels like really relatable. And this is what I want to talk about with you guys later as well, but feels like a lot of people were like, yeah, but then also is completely insane and unique, which I just find really exciting as a writer. And I also write personal essay and memoir. I write a lot about Jewish identity and Jewish journey, and I find that to be just really fascinating.
It's interesting that we're only talking about Walter as the explicitly Jewish character. There are some, I have some reads on some of the other characters and their sort of Jewishness, implied or otherwise, that I'm excited to get into.
Ooh.
just so we know who we're talking about. We have Jeff Bridges as Jeff the Dude Lebowski. We have John Goodman as Walter Sobchak, which is who we were talking about just a moment ago. We have Julianne Moore as Maud Lebowski and Steve Buscemi as Donnie. So with the pins being set up, Harry, do you think it's your time to read the IMDb summary?
Yeah, sure. Let's jump right in. The summary this week reads: Ultimate LA slacker Jeff the Dude Lebowski, mistaken for a millionaire of the same name, seeks restitution for a rug ruined by debt collectors, enlisting his bowling buddies for help while trying to find the millionaire's missing wife.
So I don't really have like a context corner this time. I do have like a Daniel's fun LA stories as they relate to the film of the week kind of corner, if you guys are eager to join me there.
Totally. Also, as I'm not an Angelino like you, but I'm a current Angelino, so I loved that part of rewatching the movie.
Just and before you jump in there, just
Sure.
part of the context, reading about this is a very personal movie to the Coen Brothers, who are, our Jewish directors in this case. And they said that I think the dude was definitely modeled after, people they knew. And it was a lot of the kind of characters were, approximations of people in their lives. And you kind of could believe that Walter, was, a sort of Jewish figure in their lives. But this movie really carries that like lived in LA feel to it. And as the resident expert on it, I thought I would just give you a little intro and set this up a little more, more properly so that you can really take the podium.
Oh gosh, Harry, please. He adjusts his TED style microphone and is ready to give a TED talk about no. I just had two fun stories, like so this is kind of like a LA sort of neo-noir movie, kind of in the tradition of like a Long Goodbye or something like that, where you have such interesting characters that our main character experiences throughout. Two fun scenes. So when Walter picks up the dude and they're going out, we're skipping ahead a little bit, so maybe I could save this for later. But, when they're heading out to drop off that ransom money, they pull into a parking lot. And in that parking lot is a video store that I used to work at called Advanced Video. So they're pulling into that parking lot. Across the street is Del Taco. And so this must have been, I think, in college when I worked at a dubbing house where they had like VCR tapes of like actors' reels, demo reels. So like before the internet was a thing so much, actors would like send VHS tapes around. And one of the copies of the VHS tapes that we made was one of the nihilists. He was like, auditioning for other roles. So we would like plug in his VHS tape in one VCR and then make 15 copies from this wall of VCRs. And we'd make a bunch of copies. So not only did I like work at the place featured in the movie somewhat in the background, but I also like dubbed a tape from one of the nihilists. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting seeing the movie after had worked there. But I do feel like, shout out to Advanced Video if you're still around. I feel like that was my gateway into post-production, is dubbing VCR tapes. So
amazing.
Anyway.
Full circle. I don't know. We could look into it to see if they're still around. I don't know how much there's a demand for that service these days, but
right.
You never know. There are a lot of vintage collectors out here who want to see VCR replication dubbing. I mean, dubbing obviously is still relevant, but
I mean, I feel like, the last blockbuster is somewhere in Oregon still. I feel like musicians are putting out their singles now on cassettes still. And I feel like VCRs and VHS tapes and everything having a comeback,
Yeah, I think I've heard like record sales also are like have become one of the biggest, I don't know how much relative to, an artist's sales, records are actually coming in, but bigger than you'd expect, I think.
So do you think we should put our podcast out on cassettes?
If we want to reach, the widest audience, I think we have to. Yeah.
You're our resident youth expert, Harry. Do you think that the youth would buy our stuff on
Let me,
on
you know what?
cassettes?
Let me check in with the youth. I'm going to get back to you. I'll throw a survey out on TikTok or something, and
That's
I'll
what
get
they
back
do.
to you.
Yeah, I was about to say it's TikTok.
It's all
versus,
surveys. Exactly. We love surveys, our generation.
Is that right?
I don't know. I mean,
okay.
honestly, BuzzFeed, all that stuff.
That's true. That's true.
I keep trying to think of a great way to tie this back into the movie. Like we were talking about like material, vintage, I was thinking of like a great rug, ties the room together. Like this really is about, it's about your stuff. It's about, what grounds you in the present. But I don't know how well that works. But anyways, we should probably talk about the movie a bit.
Yeah, I think so. Why not? Like, I'm kind of like the dude in this episode. I'm just kind of going with the flow, so like, whatever, man.
I just want to say about the plot, in preparation for this conversation, it seems like everyone agrees that the plot is like completely confusing and that might be part of the point, so like, I don't know. I don't know how much we should dive into like, the who's and whats of like every twist and turn of the caper, but I don't I don't know how much of it was intentional, but it sort of seems like no one thinks that the plot is what is, carrying this movie.
No, I mean, I feel like it's kind of like for me, it's the writing and the characters themselves. They're such big characters. Like you said, Walter is like a big character. The nihilists are like a group of big characters. The dude is like this iconic character. Every every Donnie line, like I remember in college, people were just kind of like going back and forth and doing the shtick between Donnie and Walter and the dude. I mean, that was just the thing. Shout out to a friend of ours who has a Big Lebowski themed license plate.
Great.
It's just stayed with people for so long, and I think it's because the lines are so memorable, the set pieces, the way that things just happen. It's so different than anything else that I've seen, and continue. It still stands out as this sort of unique film that has these unique set pieces. The musical we'll talk about, the way that these dream sequences happen. It's all great.
It's really true that all of the memorable scenes kind of exist outside the plot. We do put together a plot, just to kind of move us through the movie. And I've told this to Daniel before. I said, so I didn't really include any of the Walter Chavez stuff because it doesn't actually progress the plot forward. Like it would just totally distract us because it's like a side thing. Obviously, we're going to
Mm.
talk about it. And I made note of like, here's where we need to jump into that. But I totally agree with you. I think the plot serves to kind of pull you away, but it also it kind of marks, it forces you to track, the dude's, the way that he kind of progresses through the plot and the way that ultimately from beginning to end, without kind of, jumping too far ahead, the plot doesn't really bear any impact on his life. I mean, there's obviously some tragic implications of what happens that he doesn't even seem to care about so much, but like it says so much about the dude, the way that he is just so unwillingly roped into this and is just trying to get away. And the movie is almost about his escape from the plot. He just wants to smoke, bowl, and just, take a bath in peace and calm without anyone coming into his home and kind of beating him up. And it's just, there's a real tension with the plot. I completely agree with what you pointed out.
He's a pacifist, man. He's just trying to get through the day.
It
I
really
didn't
is.
pour a White Russian. I have some tea with me, but I feel like this is sort of like in honor of like the dude's sweater,
The
maybe.
colors, yeah, that's like
So
cream and I don't know, cream and latte colors.
yeah, shout out to Caroline who
Yeah,
made
like a
this.
desert.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Everyone's really rocking. I was just gonna say everyone's rocking the dude colors. I should put on a robe or something.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
kind of
Oh
wearing
man.
like a
I totally.
Yeah, I mean they do sell, like I feel like Pendleton, the company that made the sweater, has since like marketed the sweater as like the dude sweater. So yeah.
No doubt.
So if you have that handy, great. If not, why don't we take a quick break, give you a chance to change into your bathrobe. We'll come back. We'll start talking through the plot, and we'll kind of like discuss things as they come up. Does that sound good?
sounds great.
All right, we'll be right back, man.
Some stories are so profound, they transform the people who tell them. I'm Adam Langer, host of the Forward's new 7-part podcast series, Playing Anne Frank. I've been digging into library archives, interviewing actors and writers and designers to bring you a story that hasn't been told before. How the Diary of Anne Frank changed the people who brought it to Broadway, Hollywood, and the rest of the world. You can listen to Playing Anne Frank wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Jews on Film. We are here with Julie Sugar to discuss The Big Lebowski. Harry, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. Nice correction there.
Thank
Let's
you.
leave that all in.
Yep.
The movie opens with Jeffrey the Dude Lebowski as he enters his home and is immediately attacked by two guys who are asking for the money that's owed to them by his presumed wife, Bunny Lebowski. They shove his head into the toilet and pee on his rug before they realize that they have the wrong Jeff Lebowski and leave. The dude tells his bowling friends, Walter and Donnie, about what happened, and they urged him to visit the intended victim, the wealthy Jeff Lebowski, who has the same name as him, and ask him to compensate the rug. The wealthy Lebowski refuses, but the dude steals a rug anyways and meets Bunny and her nihilist friend Yuli on the way out. And that kind of sets the stage there. And then there's a lot that goes on in those opening scenes, a lot of scene setting for, the bowling and all their relationships, and just kind of already the dude's like wit which I think we get a lot of early on in that like toilet scene in particular.
There's also the incredible Philip Seymour Hoffman as kind of the other Lebowski's stooge guy. Brant, yeah, just such a good. Everything in that mansion is just great.
He plays such a straight man to Lebowski's kind of like goofy guy. And our summary obviously doesn't capture the awesomeness of this film. We say this like every episode. If you're playing Jews on Film bingo, I've said it, but like the film opens with this like tumbleweed kind of like drifting. And we have Sam Elliott, who's playing a cowboy. He does this voiceover to kind of like introduce our film. So we have like Western music to start it off.
This Lebowski, he called himself the Dude. Now, Dude, that's a name no one would self-apply where I come from. But then there was a lot about the Dude that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And a lot about where he lived, likewise.
I believe the Dude is at Ralph's Market buying some creamer in his robe and pays for it with like a check so that he can go home and make a White Russian. And I think he's starting to make his White Russian, and then the thugs come in and they immediately just like assault him and do all this terrible stuff. And he's totally flummoxed because he's just trying to like relax, smoke a joint, and drink his White Russian. And then I think Flea is one of the stooges, right? Yeah. And he like, it's not the nihilist right away. I think it's the
ones who work for it. No, it's the ones who work for Treehorn. We find out
for Jackie
later.
Treehorn. Okay, got it.
So much plot, not all the point.
Yeah, like you said, Julie, it's kind of a lot,
exactly.
but yeah.
I wanted to actually open by asking a question about that Sam Elliott frame. I didn't mention it in the summary, but like you said, it opens up with this frame, and Sam Elliott kind of pitches this like as a story that he's telling over. He describes who the Dude is. He says that he was, the right man for his time and place, that he like existed in a very specific time in the 90s and in LA, and just like was representative of that. And I think giving this movie a frame, because we really only call back to Sam Elliott I guess he shows up a little bit in the middle, but we really only see him towards the end. And to me, it just kind of presented this story a lot more like as like a fable, almost mythically, metaphorically. Like we're viewing this instead of just getting the surface level movie as a movie, which is how, any other movie would begin. We're presented it in this, in this structure, like it gives it, this unique value. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on, what that added to the movie. What do you think that choice was? And, obviously bonus points if you can tie it into some of the religious themes that I'm kind of hinting at here. But, I want to hear what you guys made of that, because it's an interesting choice. This movie could have taken off 10 minutes, 5 in the beginning, 5 in the end, and been more or less the same. So I wanted to hear what you think about that.
I just want to say, first of all, this movie came out in 98, and I watched it very recently in preparation for this, and it holds up so well. Mm-hmm. Like it really... Totally. I don't know if I could say this, or maybe it's just because I just love the Big Lebowski so much, but it really holds up so well. And this frame, which like when you describe it, like it sounds like it shouldn't work, right. Like he's this cowboy.
A little bit.
Yeah, he's this like very like stereotypical cowboy in the middle of LA. His name is the Stranger, but it does work. I mean, maybe it's just part of the myth making of the character of the Dude. I mean, we started talking a lot about Walter because this is Jews on Film, and I wanted to talk about that, initially, but this is the Dude's movie. I don't know. I mean, the Coen Brothers took a risk because, like, this could have been a flop, but it's almost like the Stranger character knew that this was going to become a cult movie and that the Dude was going to become almost like a religious figure. That's sort of, I don't know if that's what you're hinting at, Harry, but that's kind of how I'm seeing it.
No, but everything you're saying, I totally agree with. Like we joked about this at the beginning of the podcast, right? What's that faith called? It's like Dudism.
Dudism, yeah.
Like, and they have like a whole like celebration every year, and I don't know
Fest.
the deals of it. Yeah, it's very cultish. I mean, when you were calling the movie, sort of cult film, like I think it's more than a cult film. It's a literal film cult. Right?
It's a way of life for some people, for sure.
And that's what it's doing. I mean, who's their center figure? It's not like the whole point of the movie is that he's not Jeffrey Lebowski. When he's called Jeff Lebowski, he's insulted by that. He's like, I'm not Jeff Lebowski. I'm the dude. I'm this sort of generic, symbolic, like, I am the everyman. I represent everyone. I mean, that is like, I'm trying to think what the equivalent would be, in a religious setting, like what I'm thinking of now, which is not religious, but is the concept of, what Stan Lee always said about Spider-Man, the character, where why did they put this young kid in a mask? It's so that anyone could be him, and like anyone could be Spider-Man. And anyone is the dude. It's this mythic story about, all of us who we can aspire to be. And I don't know if I can pull this into Jewish, but I really agree with that. This movie, it wasn't by mistake that it became a cult movie and kind of inspired its own cult. That was all going to happen, from the outset.
Can I ask a very Jewish question to your question, Harry?
Please.
Or rather, can I answer your question with a question? What was another Coen Brothers? Jewish. Yeah, what was another Coen Brothers movie we covered, and how did it start?
So I was thinking of this, and you're talking about A Serious Man, which is the other one we covered, which its own way had like a 10-minute sequence as like, again, like a very metaphorical thing, so that you could not watch the next 90% of the movie without tying it back. What did the beginning say about what happened there? Like they as filmmakers really, I guess, pay attention to the myth-making qualities of their movies. And it's not just about the story, it's about how they're telling their story.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting.
I mean, also I did a little digging online. Sometimes I get a little carried away with, researching for the episode, but the tumbleweed, they sort of, the symbolic nature of it, it's just kind of like getting blown by the wind and having things happen to it, and it's just getting carried this way and that way. And that's like what happens to the dude in this movie. He doesn't really do anything. He kind of just like reacts to things that are done to him, whether it's like getting flushed in the toilet or having his rug peed on, or, doing this or that or the other. I think he's just kind of reacting to it all and kind of trying to get by, listening to his tapes, smoking his weed, and drinking his White Russians and bowling,
I want to push back on that a little bit, because
Please.
I think that he's definitely like this whole the whole movie starts off because he happens to have the same name as this other guy, when actually he's the dude, or El Duderino, or all those other
his dudeness.
Exactly, all the other ways he wants to be called. But I think he does actually react, and he reacts pretty reasonably. Every single time there's something that he needs to do or decide, he's actually making, with the information that he has, he's generally making like the best decision, despite being like a humongous slacker. Like he's not like he's showing up, and like when he's like, on this mission to like help with the, oh, did we get totally afield? Are we still in the middle of plot? I don't know if we got to that. Okay.
We're good.
But it's like this whole part where he's, helping meet the kidnappers of Bunny, and he could have just not done that.
Sure.
So I think he's very laid back, but he's not doing nothing either, So
Sure.
he's like a tumbleweed in terms of like things are happening and people keep coming into his house and beating him up.
Right.
But he does have agency too.
I think what you said about him, doing the best that he can with whatever information he has is exactly how I would describe it. Because like you, Daniel, I was also watching him and wondering, he's so chill, like laid back, relaxed. Is he a passive character? But, the plot starts because they peed on his carpet, and he could have been fine with that. But he goes alone to Jeffrey Lebowski and demands his rug back. And when he says no, he steals a different rug from him. Like he is active in that situation. I think what ends up happening to him throughout the movie is that he is like a tumbleweed, just pushed around by these forces that he just doesn't understand. He doesn't get why he's being why he's being beat up by these people, or why he doesn't realize, and we'll get into this later, one of the big twists is that the whole ransom thing was actually a setup by a couple different parties with different motivations. Like there is so much that pushes him around that he doesn't know. So I think he's a victim to just a limited understanding of to his circumstances and to his limited awareness of the context. And I'm sure we can pull something metaphorical about how he's just pushed around, but I don't blame him, because I think given what he knows, he does seek out certain people. He takes Maud pushing him, but he goes to the doctor later, like all this stuff. He does more than not, I think.
But I think, not to split hairs here, or just to do a 7-10 split here, but I feel like he initially was probably not going to do anything about the rug, and only after he tells over his story to Donnie and Walter do they say,
"That rug really tied the room together, did it not?"
Fucking A.
This guy peed on it.
Donnie, please.
This is the fucking guy. I could find this fucking Lebowski guy.
His name is Lebowski? That's your name, dude.
This is the guy who should compensate me for the fucking rug. His wife goes out and owes money all over town, and they pee on my rug?
They pee on your fucking rug?
They peed on my fucking rug.
That's right, dude.
I don't necessarily feel like his sort of he's not really like a confrontational kind of person. He's just like a peace and love kind of dude.
For
So
sure.
I think,
It's
again,
pacifist.
outside, I'm a pacifist, man. That outside influence affecting him and blowing him in the direction of go get what you deserve. I feel like, we see that again and again.
I think Walter is one of the outside forces
Mhm.
blowing him hither
Sure.
and thither. I mean, certainly the thing about the rug, I mean, maybe Donnie was, I think, just echoing Walter, so
And getting yelled at. Poor Donnie.
yeah, exactly. And then also with trying to, fake out the kidnappers, which turned out to be a fake out anyway, but they didn't know that. Anyway, it was Walter who every step of the way was just making things more complicated.
Yeah, this everything we're talking about with just sort of like the tumbleweed metaphor, the wind blowing him around. I mean, we spoke about this a little bit before, Daniel, just about people's identities and belief systems, and every character in their own way. I mean, they make a big deal of Walter's Jewishness, the nihilist nihilism, and they're kind of, it's all about these external like drives that are kind of pushing people to act as they do. And I don't know if the dude is just the best example, and we've kind of covered some of it, but I'm interested in tracking that as we move forward.
Sure.
So I'm just going to put that out there if anyone
Yeah.
else wants to think about it with me.
Totally. So as the film progresses, we kind of talked about it. Bunny Lebowski, played by Tara Reid, is kidnapped, and Jeff Lebowski, the old guy, hires the dude to deliver the ransom for her kidnapping, presuming that he'd recognize the kidnappers as the guys who sort of broke into his house. That night, the dude is attacked by a different group of people who steal his new rug that he's stolen from Lebowski's. And this is when we're introduced to the nihilists, right? So one of them is the guy who's VHS I dubbed, and the other one is Flea, and then there's a third person. So just for those keeping track. Walter asked to accompany the dude on a ransom transfer where he basically will scheme to give the kidnappers a fake briefcase, like a ringer briefcase, and then split the money that they're going to keep with the dude. The kidnappers take the fake briefcase, and then the disappointed dude and a triumphant Walter return back to the bowling alley. When they exit the bowling alley, when they're done with their game, they discover that the car has been stolen, and now they're really concerned because they've sort of lost this alleged missing money that Jeff Lebowski, the old, has given them. So we'll kind of stop here, and we'll kind of like talk maybe about the bowling scenes and some other, the famous Shomer Shabbos subplot and stuff like that. But yeah, any thoughts on this area?
I just remembering kind of back to this like tumbleweed image of the dude being the tumbleweed, like when this might be like structurally like one of the most dramatic moments of the movie where the dude is trying to fulfill his assignment to the other Lebowski, and Walter comes along, which already was breaking the rules, and then Walter kind of just fudges the whole thing against the dude's wishes. And I'm just remembering like the dude running after the guys on the motorcycles,
Right.
like there's just this like this
still have
very
it.
poignant
In his jellies, right?
like I've got it, because I think what have they thrown over is like the suitcase full of underwear or something.
Right.
It's quite poignant. Like he really wanted to try to do it, and he also talks about Bunny, like he's like, they're gonna kill this poor girl, and Walter is I don't know, maybe he's right in the end, but he seems very Walter is like an amazingly sympathetic character, despite the fact that he does extremely unsympathetic things, which I think is a testament to both the acting and the writing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I really like watching Walter this time. And of course I was predisposed to be sympathetic to him. I mean, he's that, Jewish icon. It was so exciting to see him. And we're going to talk about it in this section where he really starts to announce his Judaism more pronounced than ever. But in the beginning, when he's pushing the dude to do these things, it's part of the tumbleweed metaphor, but the dude just wants to hand over the money, finish it, close this saga. The more complex this case gets, the less dude wants to be part of it because he's so done with it. And I was so upset with Walter when he's like, Oh, trust me. I think the dude at some point makes the mistake of saying, maybe Bunny kidnapped herself. Like I've heard that people do things like that. And Walter's like, oh my God, she kidnapped herself. We're going to do the underwear thing. We're going to steal the money. And the dude is like, no, I don't want any of this. Let's just hand over the money. And it's funny that Walter ultimately is vindicated. I don't know how, what we should like chalk that up to, that he was, right all along. Maybe you need a healthy bit of skepticism because ultimately he's proven correct. But until they kind of came around on him and it was like, oh, actually, he was right about all this. I felt myself getting very annoyed.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think what I would
Yeah.
chalk up Walter's intelligence to is his time in the service. So for those who are not familiar with the movie and are not planning to watch it at this point, Walter's played by John Goodman, and most of the time he's wearing these like bright orange glasses, usually with a bandana. He's wearing like a tactical vest with like all sorts of pockets, and he constantly talks about his service, presumably in the Vietnam War, the Korean War.
Nam, man.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Nam.
And so I mean, I would assume that like his intelligence or the way that he talks about it, it seems like he just knows what's going on at all times. And the dude is just like you said, Harry, not having it. And I found it to be like a little bit much sometimes, but I guess that's part of the charm. And then like the fact, this sort of duality of that this person. Are we cool to get into the Shomer Shabbos stuff now, or do we want to? Okay,
let's do
okay.
it.
So I think it's just interesting that this person who's like so violent and so rude to Donnie and whatever purports himself to be this like Torah Jew who's like not going to bowl on Shabbat because he's just like technically he's like married to a Jewish woman, right? And did not convert.
Well,
is that right?
No, he was married to her, I think converted for her, and they've just been divorced for years.
The dude says,
I converted when I married Cynthia. Come on, dude.
Yeah.
You know this.
Yeah, and 5 fucking years ago you were divorced.
and Walter says,
So what are you saying? When you get divorced, you turn in your library card, you get a new license, you stop being Jewish?
This is the drawing room.
that's someone who's really Jewish. I mean, they say about converts that a convert had a Jewish soul all along, and Walter
Right,
seems
right.
to say like, yeah, like I did this when I married my wife and then we split up, but I didn't split up from my religious religious identity, my Jewish identity.
I think part of that, and you reminded me of this also, Daniel, when you were talking about, what's kind of pushing Walter to like care so much, and that whole, I don't roll on Shabbos, and he kind of says, and like also tying back to Vietnam, I think
Right. Over the line.
Yeah, all right, and he
This
calls
is
him out
bowling.
for the oh my God, we didn't even mention that scene where he pulls out the gun on the guy,
Oh,
who's not
right.
going to give himself a 0 for stepping over
God.
the line, and the dude is like, just let him take the 7, and or the 8 or whatever, and he's like, no, like,
Smokey, this is not Nam. This is bowling. There are rules.
Hey, Walter, come on. Hey, man, it's Smokey, so his toe slipped over a little, It's just a game, man.
This is a league game. This determines who enters the next round robin. Am I wrong?
Yeah, but I wasn't.
Am I wrong?
Yeah, but I wasn't over. Give me the marker, dude. I'm marking an 8.
Smokey, my friend, you're entering a world of pain.
Walter, man.
You mark that frame an 8, you're entering a world of pain.
and that, like, and of course this is obvious, and I could have put this together sooner, but like that of course translates to his relationship with his Jewishness. On one end it's the why is he still so committed to it, because he's a lawful guy, he believes in the rules, like he said, you don't turn in your library card, I converted, this is my life, this is where I am. But everything, he's very like rule bound and just and organized. And what's fascinating is that this is such an interesting relationship with Jewishness that we've seen in a film that's really focusing on, the rule following, like, and the structural components. I think a lot of times you see Jewishness on film the way we've described it, and it's in, a culture, it's in a spirituality, it's in food. There's a real strong adherence to rules, and that's kind of how he's representing, especially, on the opposite of the dude who is like kind of, religionless, like lawless kind of. He's this counter of, religion means rules, it means, governance. And I think it's such an interesting portrayal that I'm really drawn to as I'm talking about it now. I like talk about Jewishness is really bound by years of tradition and a strict adherence to a set of laws. Like that is a real component of a religion that you don't always see. And I would say that is the biggest marker of his Jewishness, is that it represents for him, this overarching structure.
It just occurred to me also that like we don't see, like, we know what he doesn't do on Shabbos,
Right.
but we don't see what he does do. I mean, even though there's even a scene that's happening. Well, actually, I was a little bit confused about the details because it seemed like it was Friday. It seemed like it was maybe before Shabbat, or I don't know. He like picked up the phone, which he wouldn't
Right.
have done, and then he
It's
was
an
like, "It's
emergency.
Shabbos."
It's
Yeah,
an
like
emergency.
that part was like a little bit confusing. But we don't see what he does do on Shabbos, but we do know because there's this whole kind of subplot about a game that's supposed to be on a Saturday, which is
Right. That's where it all comes
we haven't
from.
we actually haven't said it out loud, but Shabbos being Friday at sunset to an hour past sunset on Saturday. So this game that's supposed to happen on a Saturday, he doesn't want to do.
Mhm.
And we know how important bowling is to him, and this idea that Shabbos is even more important, that he won't roll on Shabbos, is really cool. And even in terms of like the rule following, I mean, I'm sure there are very, concrete reasons why one shouldn't bowl on Shabbat. But in terms of like what's in the Torah, like it's actually him really keeping not just the observance of the day, but and the laws, but really also the spirit of the day.
Right.
Like maybe there are religious Jews who would, walk to a bowling alley and not have their phone and not use money and have it all figured out, and they would do it. But he's saying, no, I'm not even doing that. It's Shabbos. Like, I can't roll on Shabbos.
Right. I think there's actually a deleted scene on the DVD where we see Walter going to synagogue and having Shabbat dinner.
Really?
No, that was a
Oh,
terrible joke.
I'm
I
so
wish. I'm
gullible.
saying.
Oh,
I forgot
Daniel.
that about you. No, I feel like I feel like we were robbed as Jews on film, to sort of see what that would be like. I do want to, I think you talked about it, but I wanted to put like a Jewish word to it that I'm familiar with called like a chumrah, which is like a stringency. And I feel like, people play bowling with bumpers and people play where they're, willing to fudge it this way or that way. But like, I feel like because Walter is a convert and he's like more dedicated than someone maybe who's like born into it, and he takes these chumras, these stringencies, and he really dials it up a little bit, so much so that he's willing, like you said, Harry, to like pull a gun on someone and to like threaten someone's life for like not following his Torah, so to speak. So
yeah. And I think that's also, everything that you guys are saying and what you were describing, Julia, is like we don't really see his proactive Jewishness, but we see the guardrails, we see the restrictions. We
Right.
don't know. We know that he was very hesitant to drive over on Friday night, and he does it reluctantly and he even says,
Here we are. It's Shabbos, the Sabbath, which I'm allowed to break only if it's a matter of life or death.
which is an awesome line. And again, it's a representation I feel like we haven't seen, because a lot of times you get that token proactive scene, people lighting the Shabbos candles, sitting down for a meal, but them showing only the restrictive sense, only the restrictions kind of imposed by his Jewishness. I think it shows almost more depth than I feel like I've seen as someone, because sometimes you see the glamorized part of Shabbos, you don't,
Right.
or of Jewishness, you don't think about the restrictions. But I would also bet that's his relationship with his Jewishness is more defined by what he can't do, not because he does it's more defined by what he can't do, because he's bound by rules and he likes his Jewishness, and maybe I'm reading too much into his character, but he clings to his Jewishness because of the strictly defined rules that it has set forth. And that's his draw more convincingly to me than him celebrating Shabbos. Like, he doesn't seem like the guy who gets excited for Shabbos, but he is excited, maybe to hold himself to rules, maybe to tell people that he's keeping the rules. But he, I think as a character, aligns much more to me with the restrictions of being Jewish than he does with the, more proactive traditions that I think you pointed out he doesn't really do in the movie.
Right.
I don't know if I fully agree. So we haven't talked about another huge line of his where the dude is saying, it's all part of your sick Cynthia thing, man. And he says, you're living in the past, and there's a lot of here. And Walter says,
3,000 years of beautiful tradition from Moses to Sandy Koufax. You're goddamn right I'm living in the fucking past.
I think that he's sharing like what he can't do on Shabbos, but he's also taking pride in being a part of 3,000 years of tradition. He's not saying 3,000 years of things I can't do. So it's just really interesting. And I also, Daniel, you mentioned chumras. I don't know if I agree that it's a chumrah, but I do think of another Jewish phrase, which is the idea of a fence around the Torah. So he's because there's no bowling in the Torah, right? But like, you have this idea of what Shabbat is meant to be, and then you just have these kind of layers upon layers upon layers of like protecting that,
Mm-hmm.
and so if something is questionable, it's like, well, I really want to protect this idea of the day of rest and not working, and you could see it as like overly legalistic, and like maybe he just thinks of Shabbat as all the things he can't do, but I do think he's really treasuring it as well.
Right. For sure.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with the kind of roundedness, and I'm sure it's not only about the proactive. And I think even when you hear the line about the tradition, part of me is thinking, part of that tradition is adhering to laws that were, invented before bowling existed and kind of adapting those. But yeah, I just think it's an interesting choice for the movie to portray only the restrictive parts of his Jewishness, for this character. But I definitely hear you, and I think that there's probably a lot more to his character and his relationship with it.
Sure. And like touching on your identity thing that you kind of posted at the beginning of the episode, like Walter's identity is like as a Jewish person, as a bowler, but like also as a veteran and things like that. So everyone's kind of got their shtick, and the way that they, act on that or like personify that in the film is kind of something to think about as you're watching it. So
I am curious about the way Walter's character is written and this Jewish identity of his. Like, there's a part of me that thinks like, well, maybe the Coen brothers just thought it would be really funny if this character who's ridiculous is also Shomer Shabbos. Like, maybe they just thought that would just be really fun and really funny, and they weren't necessarily thinking like, this person's going to become a Shomer Shabbat icon to, young traditional Jews, across the world. Maybe, it's a comedy. Maybe they just thought it would be really funny. And they have enough inside cultural knowledge to pull it off in a realistic way so that nobody feels like they're being made fun of. So what I'm kind of thinking about is like, could Walter have been Walter without I don't roll on Shabbos? Like is it just sort of like a t-shirt slogan, at this point? I think it's a big part of who he is, and maybe there's also some like academic discourse of like it doesn't really matter what the Coen brothers had in mind, but that's just one thing I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna hit you with the well, it doesn't matter what they intended, because
I
don't
put it
need
out
to
there
be-
anyway.
I appreciate that, because I don't need to be that, and also I don't know what they were intending. But I wonder what the movie would lose if he doesn't say those. If the Vietnam, right? Because he already has one piece of identity. Does he need the second? And for me, it kind of ropes into the nihilist angle, which, again, the nihilist as villains, they don't like, that's also could just be a memorable touch. Like, let's make them nihilists, which gives them like a little bit of like a weird, funny character that people can draw to. I think there's an interplay of identity going on there. And I think that there's, this kind of very zealous, religious person kind of, the way that he like talks about so dismissively of the nihilist, like they don't believe in anything, Donnie, and the way he kind of feels like
doesn't he call them Nazis too?
He does, yeah, because they're German also. So he calls them Nazis. And the way that kind of shapes his ideology there, again, it's part of, I think, the plot of the movie that, like we said at the beginning, is existing in tension with the dude, and the dude doesn't care about anyone else's identity, and he's just a good dude who's just like hanging out and doing his own thing. But I think it adds to the, I guess, some of the more thematic like identity politics that's going on in the world around the dude, and I think sets up a stronger contrast, and I just think fits in thematically there. And I'm willing to believe also that the Coen brothers just had a Jewish friend who didn't roll on Shabbos. He said that once, they thought it was hilarious and threw it in there, but could be more than that.
It seems like, I was doing a little poking around, it seems like the character of Walter is based on a real person, and that person is Jewish,
Right.
So
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's just kind of part of the constellation of character traits.
I think to answer your earlier thought, or what, I don't know if you were calling it a question or just like an idea.
I started as a question, and then I was like, I'm just going to say it.
There was a podcast before called The Nerdist a long time ago, and they had things called quements, which is like a question and a comment together. So let's call it a quement. But I think to answer your question or your comment about it, I think it would have worked if he was not Jewish, because I think he was such a such a great performance by Walter. And like, I think it's kind of like seasoning on food. It like added a little extra flavor. And like you said, Harry, it kind of works into other lines and sort of themes that we're kind of teasing out for the podcast. But I think having just like one thing as part of your identity would have worked for me. And, maybe the Coens, like maybe that was their comment or their commentary rather on like organized religion and like the way that someone could be, like I said, so mean and so to Donnie. Like I think about the way that like sometimes maybe I'm reading this a little bit too stretchy, but like the way that sometimes people adhere to rules so fervently, and yet like when it comes to like basic like kindness acts, they throw that kind of stuff out the window.
Ben Adam Lechavero.
Yeah, exactly. Like
yes.
My Hebrew's bad. I didn't grow up with Hebrew.
Yeah, I was gonna explain also.
Like this idea of like a good deed between a man and a person and a fellow person, and a good deed between a person and like God. So like strictly adhering to like not bowling on Shabbat, but then meanwhile you're being so mean to your fellow friend and fellow human being. Like I feel like sometimes I've noticed that. I'm not generalizing, but I'm just I've seen that sometimes where like you'll do something for the sake of a mitzvah, and like, but sometimes it's at like another human being's expense. So just wanted to call that out before we move on.
So the plot continues after this failed money handoff. The dude is later confronted by Lebowski, who hands him an envelope from the kidnappers, which contains a severed toe, which they're told belonged to Bunny. He's then contacted by Lebowski's. The dude is then contacted by Lebowski's daughter, Maud, who explains that it was her people who stole the new rug from the dude, that it was taken from him because, she said it was rightfully hers, because it had come from her father's home. So she invites him over and tells him that her father had illegally withdrawn the ransom money from the family's foundation, and that she's now commissioning the dude's help to retrieve that money that he had been given for the handoff. So the dude then receives a phone call from the police telling him that they've recovered his stolen car, and he notices that the briefcase, which he had left in the car there, is missing, and later on finds a piece of homework that belongs to a teenager named Larry Sellers. So Walter and the dude drive to Larry's house and interrogate him, but are unable to get any information out of him. So Walter then tries to intimidate Larry by smashing a brand new sports car that he believes the teenager purchased with the stolen money, but ultimately it's revealed that it belongs to a different owner, who comes out screaming onto the street and destroys the dude's car in retaliation. And this is kind of the lowest point for the dude, and I think a good place to stop to talk about this part.
Our poor tumbleweed.
Yeah, I'll mention it here because we were talking about the tumbleweed, and we've mentioned this actually a lot of in our early episodes, and haven't really found a movie where we could say this again. But the Book of Job has become one of my favorite reference points for a lot of movie, because any sort of melodrama where just things are continually happening to someone, so bad things are continually battering someone, which is a melodramatic trope, but it's obviously the core thesis of the Book of Job, which is about this character who God kind of mercilessly punishes, over and over again to test his faith. And at this point in the movie, we've seen the dude get, beat up by random strangers multiple times. He's been drawn around. He's got Walter throwing him in one direction. He has Maud roping him into another thing. Like, he is so, and now his car was destroyed by something that was completely not his fault. And I'd be remiss not to point out the Job connection, because I feel like, the tumbleweed, it's not just the tumbleweed. It's really almost like this consistently like pushing down attack, and his escape from it, which will come in kind of the later sections, is just getting away from everything, right? There's no real retaliation from it.
Is this the part where he just wants Walter to just go bug off? They have like a mini breakup. Is it here?
I think it's just after this where he's like driving home in his smashed car, and it's like all Walter's fault. Yeah. So he's kind of like pissed off. Yeah.
And the car, I think, was also messed up from being like on a joyride, and like, right? Like, wasn't it like he like picked it up at the
impound lot? Yeah.
Yeah.
He was looking for his Creedence tapes, and I think they found the Creedence tapes, but
the briefcase full of money was mysteriously missing, which later turned out to not have money. But yeah, it's such a, I know we're supposed to talk about the dude, but like, I just keep thinking about Walter, because, and not even the Jewish part of Walter, but this is the part where like, the viewer can't help but like hate Walter a little bit. Like he's just like so outlandishly terrible with all his choices. It's like that episode of Seinfeld where George Costanza just decides to do the opposite of his instincts because his instincts are just so bad.
Okay.
And then when he does the opposite, like things start going like swimmingly well for him. Like I feel that way about Walter. Like he should just do the opposite of what he wants to do in any given moment. And I think we also get to a similar place as the dude where we're just sort of like enough already, or like the Yiddish would be like genug schon.
Yeah.
Oh, feel free, by the way, to sprinkle in Yiddish whenever applicable. I think that'll kind of like amp up the Jewishness.
I have a backseat Yiddish thing when we get to the end, so I'll make sure I'll make sure to pull it out.
I was just gonna say that like I feel like Walter is kind of like the Yetzer Hara, like the evil inclination with a lot of this stuff. Like he's often sitting on the dude's shoulder who's like, again, this pacifist, just kind of like going with the flow. And Walter's like, you got to do this, you got to do that. And he's like, no, I'm not going to intimidate some like little teenager. I don't really know, by the way, just side point, why was the kid's homework? Did we ever find that out? Or is that like not important to the plot?
Why was it in the car?
Yeah, I don't know that we ever find that.
I think he was. I think he stole the car, right?
Oh,
I think he's the one who stole the car. But he didn't take the money because there was no money.
Well, he probably took the briefcase.
Probably took the briefcase. Yeah.
Yeah, but he didn't admit to it. Interesting. Yeah, it's all like I feel like Walter, like you said, Julie, like it's good reason to hate him. He's basically this inciting force that like is capturing the dude in his whirlwind and just making him do things he wouldn't otherwise do. And so I think it's good for them to kind of like cool off at this point. Yeah, it's just there's so much stuff that we're not capturing in this summary. There's all these subplots about like the Bunny's like film career and adult film and that whole thing. We're gonna get into that, but like I think the dude discovers it, and then we have this. This is the part right when we're introduced to Maude, and we sort of see her kind of doing her art and describing it.
Doing her art. We have to describe what that looks like.
It's very. Some people have described it as vaginal. Is that right? Does that make you uncomfortable, Mr. Lebowski? Like,
throw all those lines in
I mean, Julianne Moore is like so good in this film, and like she had, a few years later, she was in Magnolia, another terrific performance. Really big fan of Julianne Moore.
So we should move forward to the next section because there's so much that happens there. But right before we do, that one iconic line that when Walter is destroying the nice Ferrari, right? And he says,
"What are you doing?"
Here you go, Larry. You see what happens? You see what happens, Larry? You see what happens? This is what happens when you fuck a stranger in the ass, Larry.
Just fun fact about that scene, which I've always enjoyed, is that in the TV edit for the movie, it was famously changed to "This is what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps." That's kind of the dubbing line.
That's amazing.
And it's one of the most famous, for TV dubbed lines because there's no other way to redeem that scene other than just bleeping out, the most recurring lines. So just a fun fact about that scene.
I love it.
It really is clever.
What?
When you find a stranger in the Alps, is that right?
Find a stranger in the Alps. Yeah.
Okay. So what happens? You find a stranger in the Alps. Wow.
Does it make sense in context? Not really. But
how does the movie? How does the TV version deal with all the F-bombs? Just bleeps?
Friend or we could probably look.
Maybe maybe it bleeps. That's a great question. It's a great question.
I always remember like watching Die Hard as a kid on TV, and like the last scene where like Bruce Willis is like pushing Hans Gruber down and he's falling down. He says "Yippee-ki-yay, my friend."
That's a different weight.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like totally not Bruce Willis's voice. So anyway, very good fun fact. I like that. I feel like we should probably stitch that in. Yeah, for sure. So moving on to kind of the dude is then abducted by the thugs of Jackie Treehorn. He's a porn film director who Bunny has owed money to. I think she was in a movie called Log Jammin', if I'm not mistaken. And the one who originally sent the guys to the dude's house. He demands to know where Bunny is and what happened to his money. The dude tells Jackie Treehorn that Bunny faked her own kidnapping and that his money is with Larry Sellers. The dude passes out after drinking a spiked White Russian given to him by Treehorn, and he has an intense dream sequence in which he envisions a elaborate Busby Berkeley-style musical bowling sequence featuring himself and Maud. When he comes to, he is arrested and taken to a local police station where the police chief threatens him and warns him to stay the F out of Malibu.
I laughed now that I live in LA, I just found that whole scene to be so funny. Like,
Yeah.
we've got a quiet little beach town here. Stay
Right.
out of Malibu.
Malibu.
Doesn't he call him a fascist or something like that? He gets really pissed off at this like authority figure. I think this is our like first introduction to police. Like well, no, I guess he interviews the police interview him, but like his first kind of confrontation in a way with authority, and like
And we've gotten
like
references in the past, I think, to the dude being kind of this like protester from like, an era like a 70s kind of thing. Like he mentions he actually mentions at one point, Maud, I think, that he was part of the Seattle 7. And I thought of you, Daniel, at that. And I looked it up. Apparently it's a real thing that like the character who inspired the dude was actually a part of it. It was like some big protest thing.
What was the Seattle 7? Do you know? Could you educate us?
Offhand, no. But
okay, don't worry about it.
Yeah. We'll put that in the bonus clips.
I appreciate the shout out though.
Yeah, Seattle 7.
I do like also how he's like watching TV. There was some line, I think, like he's watching TV at Ralph's at the beginning, and it's like George Bush is like saying some sort of line, and then like later he sort of parrots that line to Mr. Lebowski Sr., like word for word. So he's kind of just.
I missed that. That's amazing.
Yeah, he's pretty funny in that way. Like in terms of his beliefs, it's just like it's a little fluid, But yeah, any thoughts on this section?
If anyone has any interesting things to add about the musical sequence, because that's obviously one of the most iconic moments in the film. And, I've seen pictures of people dressing up for, what did we call the Dude Fest? I'm sorry, I keep forgetting.
I think it's called...
Or just like Dudism, which, by the way, is totally
Lebowski
Dudism.
Fest?
Lebowski Fest makes sense. And Dudism is like kind of like Judaism,
Okay.
There's a clear parallel. I don't know where to go
why
with
not?
that. But I've just seen, people dress up in all those outfits and stuff. But yeah.
I was gonna say about the musical sequence, or like the fantasy sequence in general, that like it also held up so well because I remembered it and I was like, oh, but that's not gonna work out. But like it does, and the music is
it's great.
like I'm gonna regret trying to do this on a podcast, but,
like
what? Yeah, there's that. But I was also thinking of like na 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 na. I can't do it. But there's like a very specific melody that just like popped into my head the second you guys were talking about the sequence, and I think that and the stranger framing, I kind of add this sort of like mythical quality to the whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in this musical sequence, he's like flying, right? And then he like goes through a bunch of people's legs, and I feel like he's wearing like a handyman outfit. So I'm not sure if that's like a reversal of his slacker persona. It's a very obvious stretch, and like, we're kind of like subtext, but I'm just like, yes, obviously he's kind of mimicking the porn outfit that he saw when he was watching the tape of Logjamming and Bunny Lebowski, sure. But I was just going to say that like, in a sense, it's very much a fantasy that like he's this working person who's like a handyman, who's like able to like fix things and not only like solve cases, but also just be like a worker bee. Whereas now he's just kind of a slacker.
That's the dude.
That's my stretch. But yeah,
I like the stretch because also we haven't really talked about this. I mean, we've talked about sort of the hijinks of him being mistaken for this, very wealthy Lebowski, but this is so much about class. I mean, this is, he's not a handyman. He's not a blue collar worker, out there earning his keep. It's unclear to me how he's even paying rent at all. We see exchanges with this like, kind of, sad, but like also a dancer landlord character.
Right.
But, like,
I forgot about him.
It's unclear to the viewer where Lebowski ever gets money ever to pay rent.
Yeah. He's behind on his rent, but his landlord is very passive. He's like, "Hey, whenever you got a chance, and you could kind of pay
and then
me,
like,
that'd be
and
great."
then there's this like sweet scene. They like go to the landlord's like interpretive dance recital, But this is also about class. I mean, this is about like the huge distance in the stratosphere between someone like Bunny or Maud or, the Big Lebowski, and the dude.
And then we learn about the Big Lebowski that he doesn't actually have any of the money that he presents himself with. He has like this whole wall of just like awards and things and holds himself up in this, very revered, but he isn't actually as wealthy as he says he is. He's probably not as successful. I think Maud even says like, oh yeah, we let him run the charities because we wanted to give him something to do to feel good about himself and like, flirt with his ego. Like there's a real, balance of people like, trying to flaunt and get themselves into, I think, a higher class, and people who, like the dude, are probably more comfortable kind of coasting where they are. Even when like Walter's like, we have to take the money, $1 million, he's not really interested. He's happy with where he is.
I mean, yeah, I do think that like he is hurting for money, but because, like he said, he's back on rent, or he's, behind on rent and things like that. And
but is he behind on it, or I think the guy just says, tomorrow is like the 10th, and he's like, yeah, and he's like, means rent's due tomorrow, and I think the dude's like, okay, like I didn't get the sense that he was struggling.
I thought he was behind. Like,
I think he's behind, and I think like he's like the landlord's like very meek, but like is trying to ask him to pay,
right?
And the dude's not paying, not because he's so chill, but because he doesn't have the money.
Right.
But I also got the impression from the scene that they've had this conversation like 1 million times before.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the landlord's like tired of bringing it up, but he's like such a nice guy who's busy with his interpretive dancing that he's like, yeah, I don't, I feel bad bothering you, but if you could pay the rent, that'd be great,
Right.
Harry, I was thinking when you're saying about like how the other Lebowski, the quote unquote rich Lebowski is really just, playing a role, right? Like it turns out that he's just sort of, not even pushing papers around, but just, like pretending to be this huge, mega bucks kind of guy, and he isn't. But like there's so much of that happens at the end of the movie. Like the final act is like so many things turn out to be not what they seemed, or not how they profess to be. And maybe the fact that the dude and Walter, and unfortunately not so much poor Donnie, but maybe also Donnie a little bit, but like the dude and Walter especially, is that they are really who they are. And there's no like in terms of like character development in a classical sense of like people changing.
Yeah, no.
Neither of them change. Everything just kind of happens around them, and their circumstances change, and even the bad guys change. Like quite literally, like the bad guys keep being different people, and then they turn out to not be that bad.
Right.
But the dude and Walter are who they are, and they're really real, and they're really consistent, and everyone else is kind of a faker. Maybe not Maud. I don't know. We haven't given Maud her due. She's also an amazing character.
Yeah. She's interesting because like she's also somewhat can I say duplicitous? Is that right? Is that fair to say? Like in some way, like she has her ulterior motives with Mr. Lebowski, with the dude, I should say, sorry. She has her ulterior motives with the dude, and like the dude is kind of oblivious to these ulterior motives. Like I'm not sure. At this point in the movie, I think they have gone to bed together. Is that correct? At this point? No. Okay, the first sentence in our next beat. I'll save my shtick, but I do want to give Maud her due.
Before we move on, I'm going to let you move on. But I would be remiss not to. I'm going to tie together a couple things we were talking about, because I wanted to talk about some of the growth that I think happens in the movie and the real turning point for the dude. And I want to take us back to that, Busby Berkeley sequence, because that whole number, because I'm going to put together, I hope you're ready for this, because this is going to be a little bit of like a stretch, a little bit,
okay,
metaphor.
I got my ticket for the stretch train.
Please. Oh yeah. Get ready for this. Very Jewish. So, right. You remember that sequence. He, goes down the stairs, descends into wherever, there's this whole bowling thing, throws the bowling ball. And what happens? We spoke about this before. He, goes through all these women's legs. Right. And like, he's going through their legs. It's like, of course there's like a sexual aspect to it. He turns over, he gets this big smile on his face, but I don't think it's such a stretch to say that there's like a birthing element of it. He's passing through kind of the open legs. He gets out on the other side. And what's the first thing that happens? If you remember, what's he like chased by, right? What immediately converges on him it's the scissor guys. It's the guys that are holding the scissors, kind of chopping him. And if you remember, those scissor people are threatening. The reason he's dreaming about them is because earlier in the scene, they threatened to cut off his penis, right?
It's Johnson.
That came really? It's Johnson. Right, exactly. They cycle through the different names of it.
Cut off your Johnson, Lebowski.
And what does that make you think of? Kind of cutting yourself there right after you're born, right?
Oh,
But there's
I
a whole
like
circumcision
this.
thing going on. So, dude,
Oh
right?
my
This is
God.
This is
where
good
we've
stuff.
gotten. So what I'm trying to pitch here is that in this scene, right? And it's obviously Freudian too, that kind of fear of, losing your Johnson, as we just called it. But there's something real about, there's a rebirth happening here. He's passing through the legs. He's coming out on the other side. He
Wow.
has this kind of circumcision. And I'm not sure if he's becoming Jewish and that kind of leans into what he's going with this, or if it's just part of the kind of rebirthing metaphor. But from that point on in the movie, everything else that happens, he finally, I think, makes sense of what's going on. Like, he wakes up from being blacked out, and I didn't get what happened. I was like, why was he knocked out by Jackie Treehorn? And he walks home and his place is a mess, and I forget who he tells it to, but immediately he's like, yeah, they drugged me so that they could raid my house because they didn't believe me that the money was with Terry. Like, he starts to put everything together, and that kind of, I think, spirals into the whole confrontation where he just he learns new information from Maude, and we're about to get into this. That leads him to go back to confront the Lebowski, Jeff Lebowski. Like, from this point forward, he's done getting pushed around. He's done being apathetic. He's kind of fully transitioned to, not necessarily proactive, because I agree. I think he had been until this point, but he's going to determine his own destiny now, and he's going to stop being pushed around. He is reborn, awoken from this, and is ready to, set his path straight. And I don't think he takes shit from anyone after that. Even with Walter, he stands up to him more. Right. And that to me is the big turning point of the movie, this whole rebirth sequence.
I love it, Harry. Stretch of the Pod award goes to you.
Wait, I'm gonna stretch it further.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
And this is with the art is to be interpreted by us, and it doesn't really matter what the artists have in mind. Okay,
exactly.
We've talked about the Book of Job, but Harry, what you're saying is making me think of a different Jewish story.
Okay.
Of misfortune after misfortune after misfortune, and then a dream in the middle of the night, and then the fortune changes. The Book of Esther.
Okay.
Which I wonder. I mean, again, I don't think they were going to consciously and then we're going to pull a Book of Esther, turning point. But there really is this in the Book of Esther, King Ahasuerus can't sleep. I guess it's not a dream, but it's like a middle of the night sequence. And it's that point where he discovers, that whatever Mordecai helped him, and he didn't know it.
Read me a story, right? So I can go back to
there's like a book of
stories,
a log of it. Almost, I almost, in my memory, it's almost like a journal of everything that's happened around the palace,
So like a blog, but from a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. It's
a live journal.
Yeah, exactly. Open diary, But anyway, I just thought of the Book of Esther in terms of this kind of night dreamy sequence, and then after that, your fortunes change.
Right. I mean, Jews are really big into dreams. I feel like Joseph had some pretty solid dreams. There's a lot of dreams. No musical dreams. I don't know of any. I mean, I know Joseph, Technicolor Dreamcoat. Sure, we could go there, but I think
But I agree with you. I think that's a big Jewish theme. Dreams kind of being that turning point for someone's fate, whether it's because they're you're getting sort of this. What's it, that divine inspiration, I'm trying to think of nevuah. How would I say that?
Prophecy.
Thank
you. That's the word. Thank you.
Yeah.
The concept of just sort of going under, getting this prophecy, kind of where your fate is changing, or just having these seminal moments happen while people are sleeping. Whether or not they were pulling directly from the Book of Esther, I think it is maybe that's a stretch, but I do think it is fair to say that they recognize this concept of things changing, fate changing through a dream.
Totally.
I mean, the Book of Esther is definitely a stretch, because as I was saying it, I realized it wasn't actually a dream sequence, but but still, I mean, these otherworldly, this idea that, in the middle of the night, these kind of surreal spiritual things can happen, is, I think, pretty Jewish, or maybe it's just spiritual, I don't know. I mostly am a fluent in Jew speak, but I think it could also just sort of be we it's part of the myth making is these kind of when you're not totally with it, that's when kind of interesting things happen.
Totally. Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, he's smoking pot, throughout the movie we talk about
all the time.
Not being fully plugged into reality.
Right. Yeah, for sure. He's constantly drinking, constantly smoking weed. That may affect his perception, I think. But to be fair, you said, Harry, he was drugged. So, I mean, I think
Right.
that might have a lot to do with it. I'm going to wrap this story up so
Get us to
we
the
can
end,
kind of,
yeah.
yeah, totally. So as we were talking about a few minutes ago, the dude returns home where Maud is waiting for him. She reveals that her father, Jeff Lebowski, has no money of his own, that his wealth, in fact, came from her late mother. So this leads the dude and Walter to confront Jeffrey Lebowski, where they find that Bunny has returned, having simply gone out of town without telling anyone. The dude then realizes that Bunny's nihilist friends faked the kidnapping to blackmail Jeff Lebowski, who in turn embezzled money from the family charity, blaming its disappearance on the blackmailers. The briefcase given to the dude never contained any money. An enraged Walter tips Jeffrey Lebowski out of his wheelchair. In a final confrontation outside of the bowling alley, the nihilists set fire to the dude's car and demand the ransom money that they think still exists. Walter fights them off. I believe he throws like a bowling ball at one of them. But during the altercation, poor Donnie, played by Steve Buscemi, dies from a heart attack. Walter scatters Donnie's ashes from a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and they have a nice, meaningful service. And afterwards, the dude and Walter go bowling to mourn Donnie. At the alley, the dude encounters the stranger, the film's narrator, played by Sam Elliott, who's drinking his sarsaparilla drink. And he sums up everything that happened in the movie, noting that he didn't like seeing Donnie go. I think he says something like, sometimes you beat the bear and sometimes the bear beats you, kind of. But we'll talk about that in a second. He remains optimistic, and he reveals that Maud is pregnant with a little Lebowski on the way. And that's where our film ends. So like it's a cycle of life. It's a lot of I think, do they call the kid Donnie? I forget. Do they mention something like that, or am I making it up?
I think it just says a little Lebowski.
Little
on the
Lebowski.
way.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So
maybe in the sequel that'll come out someday.
There was a sequel that starred John Turturro only. It was about. I'll look it up.
There was supposed to be, but I don't think it ever came out, unless.
Unfortunately, it did.
Oh God.
It did? Oh, then maybe I'm thinking of something else.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about John Turturro's performance as
Who's
Jesus.
Literally named Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, the most, but yeah, you go ahead and let's talk about this, and then I'll look up some information about this film.
I want to mention. I promised I had a little Yiddish in my back pocket. So one thing I noticed watching the movie recently is that at the end, when the stranger comes back, he says the word "tukus." He says,
Darkness washed over the dude. Darker than a black steer's tuchus on a moonless prairie night.
Love
that's tuchus. That's butt. That's tush. And it blew my mind a little bit, because I was like really ready to like talk about Walter's Jewishness and what that means and all of that. And then I'm like, wait, like the stranger just said tuchus. Like, what is going on? I don't know if that necessarily means that the stranger is Jewish, but to me, it just sort of pointed at a sort of a general wink and a general Jewish flavor that the Coen brothers are giving to the entire story. And I do suspect that they also just thought it would be really funny. I mean, I don't know what a viewer who isn't familiar with tuchus, like you have to like translate it from tuchus to tuchus. Like there's a lot of work you have to do to even figure out what he's saying. But it really blew my mind a little bit.
I wanted to update you just real quick about the follow-up on the Jesus movie. The movie's called The Jesus Rolls. It came out in 2019.
Really?
Yeah. And it's rated at 4.4 out of 10 on IMDb, according to 4,000 ratings. So I don't know if we're going to be discussing that one on anytime soon. But it's funny that like I think a lot of these characters and a lot of these subplots that we, of course, we don't have that much time on the podcast to discuss everything, but like we didn't even mention Jesus. It's crazy. But Harry, go ahead. Back to you.
So much to say about Jesus being, I mean, there's a lot of irony there in like some of the lines. Maybe we can pull one where Walter is saying to him, like Jesus gets very upset about them moving the game for Shabbos, and whatever. There's some obvious, like, he wouldn't care. He's like, whatever, I'll beat you on Wednesday or whatever. But just the tuchus thing, I think it's, and tuchus, because that's kind of how he says it. But I think everything you're saying about A, maybe it was just funny, but also B, like being a knowing wink, I think fits in with that. I mean, he's the frame, right? So the frame is like, read into this. There's some like Jewishness to kind of the packaging and presentation of this. And I think it's also funny, in the scene, like you were saying, if someone's not going to make that leap, and it took me even a second, someone who's more familiar with the Yiddish to kind of place I'm like, did he just say tuchus? Like, is that what he's talking about? I think if you don't have that background, it's just like weird, cowboy speak. Like there's that line earlier, Daniel, you mentioned about like, either you eat the bar or the bar eats you. Like
The bear.
I have to put on subtitles. Well, no, he says the bar. That's my
Oh,
point.
does he?
He said, no, he means the bear.
Oh,
but
okay.
It
Yeah.
sounded like the bar. And until I like put
Interesting.
on subtitles,
Right.
because I didn't have subtitles when I watched the first scene he mentions it, but then when he brought it up at the end, I was like, oh, is he saying the bear the whole time? And I think that's where this tuchus plays in, that it's just like, it's just part of like cowboy speak. And I think there's a real, humor to that, saying that like, Yiddish is like, cowboy speak almost, and what that says about Yiddish or cowboys or both.
I mean, it's almost as like foreign to the average viewer, right? Like they're both sort of these old languages that like some people speak it fluently, and like the stranger certainly knows what he's saying, but the dude is sometimes not really following what he's saying. And I feel like also the dude has his own dudisms, and like some of what he says doesn't really make some sense to anyone else but him. Like everyone speaks their own language. It's very interesting. I think, yeah, I feel like poor Donnie, I feel, so bad for him. He's constantly just like trying to, wedge his way into these like intense conversations between Walter and the dude, and is always shut down by Walter. He's just a very curious, let's go on a stretch train journey, right? So like, I'm assuming that the dude is this lapsed Jew. Like even though like maybe he's like this person of Polish descent, in my mind, he's like an unaffiliated Jew. And Walter is this like sort of, like a convert, very, very zealous. And like Donnie's just a curious Jew who like wants to ask questions and wants to be like included in this conversation about what's going on, and is always sort of shut down by this like overzealous guy. And I know I'm already jumping into themes for the next section, but I just wanted to, because, poor Donnie, I feel bad for him, and I love Steve Buscemi. He's great. So.
And also like this whole thing about, you don't break Shabbat unless it's a matter of life or death. I mean, there's a main character who like literally dies, it's sort of, I mean, look, the movie's a comedy. It's a dark comedy at parts, but like there's a moment with the funeral and the ashes that is just like ridiculously darkly funny. Like the wind is blowing in the wrong direction and they get like ashes like all over themselves,
Right.
But yeah, I was thinking about that too when we were talking earlier about Walter's observance, and he is flexible. He does end up breaking Shabbos to help, and then he's ticked because it's not actually a matter of life or death, and then someone does actually end up dying.
Right.
Yeah. I don't want to say it's his fault, but like there's a certain sequence of events that Walter absolutely had a huge role in that did lead to the death of a human.
Yeah. Including, I mean, initiating the attack against them. Like the dude, I think, wanted to just walk away, and Walter was like, "No, we're fighting them. We're settling this."
Right. Well, he's a soldier. He's a tough Jew. He's not going to back down.
Right. He's a soldier, and he's a religious. He's very passionate about his religion, and he's fighting these nihilists who represent, somewhat of the opposite.
No belief in anything.
Nothing. Yeah.
Right. But I feel like it's kind of they clearly are capitalists in some way. Like they're blackmailing and bribing. So I feel like it's just this sort of like facade that they put on. They dress in their black. Didn't they put out like a Bauhaus style record we see at some point? Like they have, I mean, I think it's bullshit, frankly. Like this whole persona that they put on. I know it's not a hot take. The movie came out in '96. I'm not like, but I don't know.
You heard it here first.
I know. Breaking news. Daniel thinks the nihilists are bullshit. Like obviously the film, takes the piss out of them as well. But yeah, it's unfortunate. I think, the takeaway for me is they should have just had like a little card at the end, in loving memory, Donnie. Just, he's a victim of all this stuff. I think everyone is a victim of Walter's like overbearing, just extraness, I guess. I don't know how else to say it, but yeah. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll rate this film, The Big Lebowski, on a scale of 1 to 5 stars of David in terms of its content, its themes, and its cast and crew. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Jews on Film. We are here with Julie Sugar to rate the film The Big Lebowski on a scale of 1 to 5 stars of David. Harry, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, for sure. So, cast and crew, that's kind of where we start with. And the Coen brothers, are worth mentioning. Part of the reason why I think we were excited about this movie, obviously it has a lot of Jewish content, but the Coen brothers are very Jewish filmmakers. We've covered, maybe some of their more explicitly Jewish films, definitely more so than this one when we did A Serious Man. But they always infuse, certainly a lot of, thematic depth, whether you want to read that as Jewishness, which I think we have to a certain point. And then of course they insert a lot of content in there in the context of Walter, who is, we joked about this, that like, and not even joked, I think we confirmed that, they did know someone who was like Walter, but that much was clear because their depth of knowledge was not the sort of tokenization, like let's throw in a Jewish character and have him, light a Shabbos candle and kind of call that Jewish. Like there were some deep cuts here that I really appreciated. So that kind of bleeds into my answer for content, which I think was, as a movie, I don't think you would mistake this movie for a Jewish movie. I think there's some stuff going on below the surface, whether that's in the structure of it and whether you want to call it like, a morality play or a meta, like this sort of metaphorical read that we're talking about, this fable, and not that is something that's inherently Jewish, but certainly, there's some spirituality to a lot of the story. But I think in terms of its actual surface level content, it's enough that it's going to get a couple points from me without getting into numbers, the Jewish stuff, because not only is there so much, just mentioning of words like Shabbos, Jewish, stuff like that, but also the depth and the way that they explore that and everything we were saying before, which I really want to point out again, which is just this representation of someone Jewish in relation to their restrictions and what they can't do on Shabbos. That was a real deep portrayal of a Jewish character. Like I read one summary to start this episode off that was that was kind of sparse, but there was a second one that said the dude's friend, the very Jewish Walter, whatever, like that is so clearly part of his identity. I think you can't think of his character without thinking of his Jewishness. So there's a lot of content there. I'm kind of setting this up for everyone else because Coen brothers, Walter, plenty of Jewish content, but I want to hear from the rest of you. I've gotten to say a bunch of themes so far, so if anyone wants to add to just the Jewishness of the themes, of which I think there are plenty. I think without giving it away, I'm going to end up giving this a couple points. But Julie, I remember you were saying that you had some stuff you wanted to add to the theme, so why don't you mention some of those now?
Yeah, this podcast is called Jews on Film, and I feel like the character of Walter is just such a massively kind of sticky, right? Like we really, anyone who's seen The Big Lebowski really remembers his character. And if you're Jewish and if you live in, a Shabbos world or Shabbos adjacent world, I think there's a lot of pride. Sorry, if you live in a Shabbos world, it's also the kind of world where you watch Coen Brothers movies. There's a lot of pride in seeing this depiction. And I think what's so interesting about it thematically is that here is a very popular movie, a cult classic, almost like the definition of a cult classic, where not only is there a Jewish character, it's a character who has actively embraced being Jewish, becoming Jewish. If it's happened before the movie started, but he went in the direction of Judaism and Shabbos and a Jewish life. And there are so many pop culture instances of people, fictional and non-fictional, who, I don't know if that's a word, fictional and real people who are going in the other direction. Like there's a lot of very popular stories of people leaving religious observance and leaving, Shabbos observant communities. And I find it thematically to just be really positive and exciting to see representation from someone who's also just like so unique, but also feels like he can really carry, Jewish pride and religious Jewish pride.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, Walter is one of these like you said, in the canon of like modern day Jewish characters, I feel like he is probably on the Mount Rushmore among, just a few other characters that we'll probably discover at some point in our podcast, Harry. And I do think we should make a t-shirt with a Mount Rushmore of Jewish characters, because Walter would definitely be on there. I did, all of what you said, Harry, cast and crew, we talked about it, and like the story, not super Jewish. I think where the film, borders on stretch for me, but also like gets some points, is like this idea of like identity and like and a sense of belonging. Like everybody wants to be something, the nihilists have their club, and then the thugs and Jackie Treehorn, like everyone has like a very specific role. Like you want to be Lebowski's like he belongs to this like rich group of people, and then like Donnie, like I said before, kind of like wants to fit in with the bowlers, and this, I think it's a real thing within Judaism. Like certain Jews dress a certain way, they all behave a certain way, and like a lot of people will adopt a method of dress or a way of being or a way of behaving in order to like sort of fit in with that. I think, the nihilists are like a great example of like these people who, dress in black and like are very specific about how they interact with the world. Walter is a little bit of a funny situation because like he's a very strict follower of rules, but he doesn't dress the part of what you would traditionally see as like a religious Jew or an observant Jew. And then the dude is he's a wandering Jew, he's like this sort of person who's floating through the world and kind of trying to get by. But, for me, that's where it scored some Jewish points. But yeah, mostly stretch, but still all the things we kind of touched on. Yeah, I'm all here for it. Numbers wise, what are we thinking? Because I know that's like why most people tune into this podcast, so that we can give it an arbitrary rating of 1 to 5 Jewish Stars of David. Julie, do you want to start us off?
Oh man.
Not speaking to the quality of the film, just
No, the
Jewishness
Jewishness of the film.
Yeah.
Maybe 2.5, but it's like 2 stars are Walter.
Okay. 2 stars of Walter and half
2
a star.
and half a star. I don't know. I reserve the right to change my mind.
Sure.
As we noted before, I'm very easily persuaded. So
sure, that's fine. Could we call them like Stars of Dude instead of Stars of David?
Stars of Dude.
I mean, then we're practicing dudism, which is fine. I think that's in the spirit.
Right. Absolutely. Harry, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I can be persuaded, especially when I get to go second. So I'm kind of thinking same, 2 stars for Walter. And like, he really is such a good chunk, but we did the summary. I mentioned this in the beginning, like we didn't mention any of the Jewishness in the summary of the movie because it just wasn't in the plot. And then again, this movie is a lot more plot than movie. Like this movie, uniquely is about character and, vibe, for lack of a better word. So 2.5. It's a pretty good number, just because I think there is some thematic stretch Jewishness, but I don't think you're really you're not watching this and thinking this is the Jewish movie. It definitely is the movie with the big Jewish characters, but it's not so Jewish. So I can't really give it more than 2.5. So I'll stick with that 2.5. I actually like that number.
Sure. Yeah, I think that works. I think no, that wasn't my.
We all agree. Great. Okay.
Woo!
Done.
Great work.
Podcast.
2.5.
3 Jews, 1 opinion.
Right.
Exactly.
No, I feel like I think what you're all saying, I'm kind of on board with. I think the one last idea that I'll kind of wedge in here is that, like I said at the beginning, it's kind of like a neo-noir film, and it's kind of loosely inspired by the work of Raymond Chandler. So it's kind of like little episodes or little segments, and like a lot of characters in the film, and they're all kind of not like a parsha of the week, but like there's different stories that we're kind of following, and they're kind of larger than life. So I'm gonna maybe I mean, for the sake of like peace and love and harmony and all that stuff, I'll also go with 2.5. I think it's it's not a super Jewish movie on the surface, but there's a lot of like Walterness plus some stretches. So I think I'm right on board. I do maintain that Lebowski's Jewish just because Lebowski sounds very Jewish. And like, I was like Googling, is Jeff Lebowski the dude Jewish? And, you know, I
think
didn't come up.
I think I read somewhere that with the robe, the hair, and all that, he's kind of supposed to be Jesus. You know, I
Right.
heard that, Rain. Which
Who was
honestly, I don't know if
Jewish.
that helps or hurts your case, right? Because he was Jewish. He's also Jesus. So that, I mean, that kind of feels like a 2.5, right? That's
Should I change
on
it
the board.
to 3 then, or I don't know. Like I don't know. Maybe like 1.25 for Walter, since I wasn't as big of a fan as Walter as you were, Julie. But like maybe 1.25 for each of them, and then
2.75.
anyway.
That's a good number.
Yeah, so it's
Don't
2.5.
get me
Yeah.
wrong. Don't get me wrong. I also think Walter's kind of terrible. You know
Okay,
what I mean?
good.
Like,
Glad we
I'm
cleared that
not
up.
like a Walter
Yes.
fan in terms of like, I wouldn't
He's
want
not a
him to
role
be my
model.
best friend. Yeah,
Sure.
but as a Jewish character, I find him to be, and as a very specific kind of Jewish character, I find
Right.
him to be just like marvelously depicted.
Yeah.
And I like, Harry, were you the person who said something about like the vibe? Who said vibe? Someone said vibe
I
of
think
the
I
movie.
mentioned vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Sure.
mean, that would be so interesting also. I mean, we've already been talking for a while, so we shouldn't add another hour of talking, but
We could.
It's a
but it would be
commentary.
really interesting to think about the whole movie not from plot and just to think about it from vibe perspective,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
how is it Jewish or not?
It's interesting because, and we've had many conversations about, movies just having a Jewish feel to it and a Jewish aesthetic. I mean, that's a totally different way to, and, a totally different entry point for this question of Jewishness. That's totally applicable. And I don't know, part of me thought when you were saying that, maybe in, my sort of way of thinking about what a Jewish movie would be a little bit more structured, a little bit more plotted, a little bit more kind of like focused than the way that this movie. I mean, it ultimately is a puzzle box that really does, rope and well together. And I'm not sure if that's everyone else's idea of what like a Jewish structure is. And maybe, a Talmudic structure, for example, is a lot more tangential and a lot more random and a lot more taking one plot and kind of running away with it, which I guess this movie also does in some ways. But
Right.
I don't know if my immediate read of the structure of this movie, the vibe and that energy is so Jewish.
If anything, I almost feel like, and I want to be sure to say this carefully, I almost feel like the vibe of the movie is Dafka, specifically not Jewish. Like it's not, you know, and look, it's 2023. We know that phrases like somebody not seeming Jewish or somebody not looking Jewish or something not feeling Jewish. We know that that's problematic, and and
Subjective.
by the way, even all of our Yiddish phrases, like Yiddish does not equal Jewishness, right? That's particular Ashkenazi Jewish background. But I do think part of what is interesting, just to go back to Walter again, like I think there's something surprising about him. There's something almost not subversive, but there's something unexpected about how dedicated he is to Shabbos and to
Right.
his Jewish identity. And that's, I think, part of what makes him so memorable and so, in the end, it's part of at least why I forgive him a lot of his faults, because we see what he loves and he really does love it very tenderly and passionately.
Yeah.
So you mochel him, so he's good for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. He's all good. Okay, great. Awesome.
Except for the whole Donnie thing.
Right, I know.
Yeah.
I miss poor Donnie. Well, Julie, Sugar, thank you so much for being here on Jews on Film to discuss The Big Lebowski. I wanted to ask if there's anything you wanted to plug or promote at this time.
Sure. I'll promote the two organizations that I feel very connected to. One is Yiddish Pop, which is that's Yiddish and then pop.com, which is a website that teaches Yiddish using short animated movies. I'm the scriptwriter. I haven't written every single movie that's on there, but I've written a lot of them with help. And it's free and it's fun and it's interactive. And then I also fairly recently started working as the managing editor at the Jewish Review of Books. It's a quarterly print magazine. It is also online. It is a Jewish review of books, but it's not a review of only books. We recently had a review of The Fabelmans, and there was a web exclusive review by my colleague Akiva Schick on the Fleischman is in Trouble TV series that recently came out. So yeah, check it out.
Awesome. Well, we'll put a link for those things in the show notes for people to check out. But yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Jews on Film. Make sure to follow us on all social medias, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, You can email us at jewsonfilmpod@gmail.com if you have any suggestions for any future films you'd like us to cover, or any feedback for any of us, or fan mail or anything like that, whatever works. Make sure to rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify, or all those things. Give us a 5-star. It really helps out, so we really appreciate it. Jews on Film is hosted and produced by Harry Ottensasser and Daniel Zana. Daniel and Harry edited this episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Jews on Film and subscribe to our podcast to get new episodes. Thanks for listening.